So Professor Gershenfeld is currently the director of MIT's Center for Bits and Atoms. His lab breaks the boundaries between the digital and physical worlds, from pioneering quantum computing to digital fabrication of the Internet of Things. He's the author of numerous technical publications, patents, and books, and founder of the Fab Lab Network, a global community of over 2,000 Fab Labs in 125 countries. He chairs the Fab Foundation and leads the Fab Academy. And I mean, basically, he's a very accomplished guy. A Formlabs fun fact is actually that our co-founders, Max Lebowski, Nathan Linder, David Craner, they actually originally met in Professor Gershenfeld's class of how to make almost anything. So let's jump live to our Formlabs HQ and expand our minds with Professor Gershenfeld, who will be giving a lecture on how to make almost anything.
When Max invited me to do it, I noted I had reached my limit of doing global keynote summits all by myself in my home office, and suggested we actually have interpersonal contact in a room. So nice to be here with you. So I lead CBA that was created to study how digital meets physical. Over the years, we've done things like the first faster than classical quantum computation. We were part of creating synthetic life, part of creating Internet of Things for work at that boundary. And a remarkable group of kind of outlier students have come through. Max is one of this really interesting group. Jason built and runs all Facebook's computers. Rafi built and ran all Twitter's computers. And it's in a sense because I taught them not to believe in computer science, but to not believe in computer science. And so with that background, this is my most recent book. This is This is Gordon Moore's plot of 5 data points that led to what came to be called Moore's Law, even though he never liked that name. He wrote a prescient article on what if this goes for a decade, and he got almost everything right except of 2 things. One I'll talk about at the end, and one is he projected a decade. It was actually 50 years of this is Intel mainline processor scaling. What I'm plotting here is 10 years of Fab Lab scaling. They've been doubling every year and a half for more than a decade. There's more data for this than for Moore's Law. And so the question I want to ask is, what does it look like if this goes for 50 years, like Moore's Law, but now not digital communication or computation, but scaling digital fabrication? So to create CBA, we wrote an ambitious NSF proposal to get one of almost every tool to make anything. That's pretty much what we proposed. And sort of on a good day, NSF said yes, and we had one of every tool to make anything. And then we had a problem. It would take a lifetime of classes to learn how to use all the tools. And so with colleagues, I started a class modestly, and really, I mean modestly, called How to Make Almost Anything. It wasn't provocative. It wasn't meant to change anything. It was just, in a sense, for Max. It was for a small number of research students to learn to use all the tools. And then the surprise was every year, hundreds of students would show up begging to get in the class. And it's one of the most oversubscribed classes at MIT. It's spread to multiple labs at MIT and even a Harvard lab for the MIT class. And the students did the most amazing things. They did projects integrating all of the skills. Kelly was a sculptor. She made a device to save up screams and play them back later when it's convenient. And parrots have the cognitive ability of a young child. This was a web browser for parrots, not people. And this was an alarm clock you wrestle with to prove you're awake. And this was a dress that defends your personal space. And this happened so consistently year after year, I realized the students were answering a question I didn't ask. I was asking how to do digital fabrication, but not why. And they were answering the killer app is personal fabrication, in the same way that personal computing blew up the mini computer industry. So that was how to make. In turn, the response was so strong, NSF asked us to do social outreach for what we're doing. And we thought the tools were more interesting than talking about them. And so Mel King, who's still alive but not well, is a grand old man of community activism in Boston. He really pioneered the notion of mixed-use urban development. And I got to know him, and he pioneered community cable TV, then community computing, then community internet, when those weren't familiar. And so it was very natural with him to take the next step of not just provide access to technology, but provide the means to create technology at the South End Technology Center. So we set up a mini version of my lab. If you think of the lab of millions of dollars of tools and the research leading to the replicator, we put together a Fab Lab, which is about $100,000 investment, about 2 tons. It sort of fills this event space. It's enough to do the how to make class, and we put one with Mel. And then we thought we were done, and we'd go back to the lab and go to work. And then we had an accident, which is they went viral. So there was a strong Ghanaian connection that brought it to Sekondi Takoradi on the coast of Ghana. Then a strong South African connection brought it first to Pretoria, then Soshangovi in apartheid era township. This is Ling-sided above Tromsø, as far north as you can go in Europe. This is Puerto Williams, the southernmost city on Earth before Antarctica. You can't wake up in Cambridge and decide to go there. Every year, every time we open one, somebody else wanted one. They're doubling about every year and a half. There's now 2,500. So it includes 3D printer, but also large format machining, precision machining, surface mount rework, embedded programming, composites, molding, casting. So all the processes. With that, you can make all of this. And so we've been racing to keep up with that. So in turn, bright, inventive kids outside traditional pathways would come to these labs, learn skills, and then sort of fall off the end. So I started letting them sit in on my MIT classes, and eventually it became unbalanced. So I started a thing called the Fab Academy, where a student, it's not online, it's not you come to MIT. Students have peers with mentors and machines in local labs, and then we connect them globally. So it's a distributed lab. But now instead of 100 students, it's 100 labs. And so what I'll show you is one of the students in the class, this is his representation of what the experience is like.
Hi, your site is empty. Yes, I eat very. Hi, your site is empty. Yes, I eat very healthy. I eat carrots, salad, onions. No, not healthy. Empty. I mean, you have no documents. Yes, nice monuments here in my country. No. I mean, you need to catch up. WhatsApp? Yes, I use WhatsApp and Instagram, TikTok, Tinder. Luciana, another one to the list. Hey, you document as you go. The only way you have to feel the flow. Get a bit commit and get push the work. Document as you go. Sorry, but I don't understand. 21 hours inside the Fab Lab. To me, the Git is an unexplored land. It's like a bomb in my hands. You got me feeling like I will see your file.
Skills-based portfolio to document their work. And this was one just was moved to do this, describing how much work it was and how much he loved it. And so this has grown into the name was a joke, the Academy of Almost Anything, but this model of distributed classes. George Church at Harvard saw this, and we worked with him to create a bio academy, how to grow almost anything to learn biotechnology. A really interesting group is doing Fab Academy for textile technology. There's an Agri Academy for agriculture. There's a really interesting group doing diversity, equity, inclusion, access lessons from the network. There's another one emerging for teaching teachers for K-12, all using this globally distributed educational platform. And so one of the most interesting things that come out of that is the Formlabs founders met in How to Make, and the rest is history here. A number of students coming through the Fab Academy have turned into machine builders, but rather than another startup, what's emerged is a global network of machine builders doing what we've come to call Fab 2.0. Fab 1.0 is you buy the machines. Fab 2.0 is you make the machines. And there's a really interesting group of machine builders creating machines with open designs you can make in the lab, but with supply chains to also source them. And that started as sort of the talking dog stage. It was nice the machines could work. Now they've gotten really good. This is Jens in Norway. He's doing larger and larger format machines. This is shopbot size. He's working on one the size of this room, but they're good enough that these machines, he has children and grandchildren machines made on the machines. This is Danielle, laser cutter. This is Rahul in India, making a little high resolution flexural machine for dense electronics, large format 3D printer. This is Jake in my lab making machines I'll talk about of printers that understand what they're printing. This is a group, Quentin, Rob, and a few others, pushing how far you can simplify machine building. And so right now they're presenting this at the Symposium of Computational Fabrication. Nadia Peak is hosting, if you're familiar with her. What's interesting about what's going on here is he's showing mapping sensors and actuators to build machines. But this is the extreme limit of removing controls. So beyond killing off G-code, what's happening here is the stepper controllers only know how to do one thing, one microstep. There's about 10 lines of microcode, which is just make a microstep. The servos, all they know how to do is make a single one PWM pulse. And then what we're doing is we're using USB 3 to pump packets, and you can pump those packets at kilohertz rates. And so the nodes are completely stateless. And then what the machine does comes from how you connect them. So it gets rid of all the state in the machine, so you can do rapid prototyping of rapid prototyping to quickly compose degrees of freedom and make distributed control systems. And so this is some of the interesting work on this Fab 2.0 transition. And that's leading to projects like Haystack in Maine is probably the preeminent place for craft in America and maybe the world. It's where glassblowers and printmakers and fiber artists retreat to the Maine woods. And for many years, I've run a Fab Lab there. The first year we ran it, there's a great description. When Dylan went electric at Newport, it was described as half the audience was electrified and the other half was electrocuted. And it was like that when I bought digital tools into Haystack. Half was horrified at the tools and the other half were horrified at the first half. But by the second year, people were just fighting over time on the laser cutter. And so the Fab Lab has flourished there, not as a design tool, but as a media transformation tool. And more recently, it started in the pandemic. I take over the campus and we do Haystack Labs. So last year we had Ted Hall, founder of ShopBot, and Bree, founder of MakerBot, for example. Franco joined us, and we're developing machines for art. So this was, for example, AR, so you can see what you're machining. This is VR to design pottery in the studio. This is taking wood from the forest and creating superwood high performance materials. This was a new NC wire bending. So doing rapid prototyping of machines for art. One of the things that's come out of this is we've been working with the NIST Materials Genome Initiative. This is the National Initiative on Advanced Materials. And they've been very limited by, there's a very long arc you're familiar with here of developing a material, testing the material, modeling the material, designing with the material, and then producing with the material. And so this project started with us looking at just doing open designs, not of machines that make things, but of machines that measure things. So things like Instron stress strain testers or rheometers. But then as we progressed, we realized with these real-time distributed networks, rather than just measuring a property like rheology, what you want to understand, for example, is how to print a new material. And so what you want is not to measure offline, but produce online and have the machine characterize the materials as it's processing it. So for example, we're developing printers that measures flows and feeds and then adaptively build predictive models of the materials aimed at, for example, expanding use of recycled renewable materials where you can't do that offline and do it just feed forward. And this was a really interesting event we recently ran. We noticed a lot of people around the world doing work right next door to that. So he's making high performance microscopes, starting with conventional, but then moving towards things like confocal microscopes, Raman spectrometers, atomic force microscopes, UV vis. All of these groups are building open versions of advanced scientific instrumentation. And so this was an event we made around what's sort of a movement of not just citizen science, but open metrology, expanding access to advanced measurement, strongly driven by environment and sustainability. It was a real love fest. This was a stretch for NIST to do. It's way outside their usual comfort. They loved sort of people loving them, people, what they do. It's going to be hosted with CERN next year. This is going to become an annual event. And so to help drive that transition of labs making labs, we're spending more to spend less. So a fab lab can make the machines I showed you, but it can't make many of the parts of the machines. Those you have to source globally. So if you think about my lab as a fab lab today is a $100,000 lab. The machines making machines you can think of as a few $1,000 lab, getting rid of all the intermediate costs. My lab at MIT you can think of as a $10 million lab with X-ray CTs and electron microscopes. In between those is the $1 million lab. And the $1 million lab is different because it has the Waterjet cutters and the Zuns and the pick and place and all those tools. And so we've started helping regions create $1 million super labs to then deploy regional networks. So this first one is in the south of India in Kerala. This is a really interesting one. This is the first event hosted by His Royal Highness, the Prince of Bhutan, opening a super lab there. Bhutan's economy is based not on money, GDP, but on GNH, gross national happiness. GNH doesn't mean everybody's happy. In fact, people are scared of the happiness office because the happiness office measures well-being. It measures health, educational attainment, stress, and everybody in the country is accountable to it. Like paying taxes, instead of paying taxes, you report to the GNH on how you're improving well-being. This amazing Buddhist country, but they would buy crap trucked in from India and China and Japan. And so what we're doing is creating a super lab there for them to make a regional network of labs in Bhutan so that they can produce what they consume sustainably locally. That's led to, there's a group of cities, this is Barcelona's mayor, signing up to a 40-year countdown to urban self-sufficiency. Barcelona has fabulous design sense, 50% youth unemployment, whole generation can't work. My colleague became Gaudi's successor, the designer of Barcelona. He started deploying labs, so if you live in the city, you have the means to produce what you consume. This is a lab we ran at the White House in the Obama administration that led to legislation currently in the House and the Senate for universal access to digital fabrication as a new kind of right. This Fab City commitment, Boston, Somerville, Cambridge are part of that. We're in very active discussions to create a Fab Foundation hub right in Union Square. And we hosted meetings here to bring community groups in to talk about doing that, which is potentially a great local partnership. So that's Fab 2.0. There is a problem though, which is this is the inventory of what goes into Fab Labs, what we still have to source. And this is just a blow up of some of the electronic components. And so looking further out, I've been interested in all of life is based on just 20 amino acids and you don't need a global supply chain, how we can do the same thing for technology. And so we've been studying not printing and cutting, but assembly and disassembly. And we've been doing this at nano, meso, micro, and macro scales. And so just for time, I'll only do one example. A few years back, we set the world record for the highest modulus ultralight material by linking loops of carbon fiber. Then we showed starting from a single material, this is rigid, this is flexural, this is auxetic, this is chiral. We can tune a wide range of material properties just by how you assemble the building blocks. And so this was a project to make robotic assemblers that assemble assemblers from the parts they're assembling that were record-setting micro robots. These are larger ones. This is a morphing aerostructure the size of NASA Langley's biggest wind tunnel. We're making cars with Toyota, boats with Oldendorf. This in particular is one example. This is a paper coming out in Nature shortly where we looked at, to scale assembly, you need to do massively parallel serial fabrication. And the only way to do that scales is for the robots to make the robots. You need exponential ring up in robots. And so these are robots made out of voxels that transmits forces, power, and data. This is an interesting collaboration with Molex, where rather than interconnect through the system, the structure is the interconnect. And then with those functional building blocks, these are robots that locomote and navigate on the structures they're building to build structures and build robots. And then in this Nature paper, what we're looking at is a robot can build a structure, it can build another robot, or it can build a different robot, like a bigger robot. And how do you do sort of CAM how do you do CAM for the recursion of self-reproduction? And so that's just a little vignette of research looking further out. So stepping back, one Earth, 1,000 cities, a million towns, a billion people, a trillion things. MIT made the first real-time computer in 1952, spun off mini computers that created internet. That led to hobbyist computers, personal computers, Internet of Things. MIT made the first NC mill around that same time. The Fab Labs today are almost exactly the cost and complexity of the mini computer, and there's roughly one per city. The machines making machines are aiming towards 1 million, not 1,000 Fab Labs. And then 3.0 is assemblers, getting rid of the global supply chain. 4.0 is self-assemblers, getting rid of the machines. All of that's running in the lab, but that's further out. But we're right at this transition. This is one of my favorite pictures. It's Ken Thompson, Dennis Ritchie at Bell Labs on a PDP inventing Unix. And if you're using an Android or an iOS phone, what's happening in that picture is in your pocket. This is when emails, video game, the internet, all of that happened. And that's exactly at the moment today. Fab Labs will be obsoleted technologically. That's progressing very quickly. But figuring out how to use them is really the meta project. So I thought the research was hard, but in a sense it's not. That's progressing easily. But we've had to spin off a Fab Foundation, this Academy program, this Cities program. We're starting a new globally distributed incubator for business creation. All of these programs are filling kind of a void of, if anybody can make almost anything anywhere, it fundamentally changes how you live, learn, work, and play. And that really breaks how society functions. So this was a piece on the political implications. A lot of what governments do, you don't need, and a lot of what they don't do, you do need. This was for the Sloan Business Review, looking at the economic input of self-production. And then my younger brother, Alan, led the biggest video game studio at Activision. Joel led the National Labor Relations Organization. And when I would talk about all of this, people would clap and say, that sounds nice, and they would groan, because the other thing that Gordon Moore got wrong was he didn't anticipate spam and fake news and income inequality. And the libertarian internet turned into all of that. And so this is them looking at, if I'm right, and there's 50 years of scaling of digital fabrication, how do we shape that today for access to barriers and literacy and how a society functions? And it's much more than just a new business lines. It's really changing fundamental assumptions about economy, about how society functions. That's not a projection, that's happening all around the world today. And so stepping back, that's a little bit on the origin of where Formlabs come from. And this is a peek at what the next 50 years look like. Thank you.
Our first question, which if you could repeat for those on the stream, is what was Max like to have in class?
Let's see, I see he stepped out. So, yeah, so there are a couple surprises with Max as a student. There was a really interesting moment where Max and I were talking about him going to the PhD program and continuing research. And the strength and weakness of Max as a student is he was approaching his thesis like he was running $1 billion company. And so we ended up concluding that it didn't make sense to do a PhD. He should just go off and run $1 billion company. Now, I think the surprise is, if you look at the students from my lab, we've spun off billions of dollars of businesses, but all of these people, on balance, are relatively terrible managers. They all needed like a Balmer to a Gates. They needed somebody to work with to help figure out how to make a business. I think the biggest surprise for Max, you could sort of see it in how he was approaching being a student, which was like running a business. But the surprise for me, and I think the surprise for him, was that he's actually good at running a business, that he didn't need somebody else to take over and do that, but he could steer it technically, but also commercially. And it's a useful story because I often have to tell people looking at doing a PhD to sort of push back, and Max a good existence proof of, you should only do a PhD if there's absolutely nothing else you can do.
Next question, you talked about the tool set that you use. How often do you add a recommended tool, and what do you think would be added next?
So,
Can you repeat the question?
oh, sorry, yeah. So the question is the tool set. How often, let's see, where did I have that? Let me go back to here. The question is the tool set. So I take very, very seriously this notion of Fab 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, Fab 1 is you buy the machine. And part of what made that scale exponentially is we just had an inventory. We didn't say everything is different. We simply said, this is a Fab Lab. This is what you get. And it worked really well as a template. People and projects were then distributed. Fab 3 and 4 are what's working in the lab, the transition to assemblers and self-assemblers, that there are many reasons why I believe that's where we're going to scale to. But this Fab 2.0 transition is rapid prototyping of rapid prototyping. And so that means many things. It means the labs need to be in networks with these super labs with some more advanced tools. It means we need to blow up the assumptions of CAD, CAM, machine control, and motion control. So we need to kill off STL, we need to kill off G codes. You need to interface the software directly to hardware. We have great collaborations with SolidWorks and Autodesk on the design tools. But then what it means is rather than a new tool, it means you do rapid prototyping of rapid prototyping so the tools are as expressive as what you do with them. So the Fab Lab in Bhutan, Sonam and Zina, two women in the lab, were bothered by plastic bottle waste. And so they made a really interesting version of a machine that unwinds PET bottles and turns them into printing filaments, was one of their machines. Jens is bothered by scaling, and so he's been working on gantries to make warehouse-sized machines. The answer to it is rather than a standard set of tools, there's a standard set of building blocks, and I alluded to that here. And this project is called a Rumbu, named for ants in the south of India. There's a standard set of building blocks, and then you compose them into machines, and the machines are all different. Aside from skills and jobs being local, it means they adapt to the workload. So in that world, it won't happen overnight. But it does mean projecting further out. You don't need traditional companies just to sell you the machine. You do need them to make the things that are hard to make locally. And also we found it's essential, even when you have open designs, you need supply chains for them. There's a subset that just works from the open designs. You need supply chains to source them. So it's a great question. And the answer is the irrelevance of the question, that the machines are going to become all different.
Okay, I think that's it on time.
Okay, thank you all. And I'll say I'm proud and happy to see what you accomplish. Thank you.